For most of my life, I believed I came from a good family. Not perfect, but respectable. The kind of family people trust without asking questions. The kind neighbors point to when they talk about values. My father was disciplined, reserved, and deeply respected. He spoke less than others, but when he did, people listened. My mother was quiet in a way that felt nurturing, almost protective, as if silence itself were one of her responsibilities. Our home was calm. No screaming, no chaos, no visible cracks. Dinner was always on time. Doors were locked early. Conversations stayed measured and controlled. Looking back, I realized something important. Nothing in our house was ever truly spontaneous. But at the time, I mistook that control for stability. As a child, I never questioned it. I didn't need to. When relatives visited, they stayed briefly. Voices dropped when I entered the room. Laughter stopped just a second too fast. Then they disappeared, sometimes for years. If I ever asked where someone went, the answer was always the same. They're busy. They moved. It's complicated. That phrase, "it's complicated," followed me my entire childhood. But I accepted it because children trust what feels familiar. Teachers praised my manners. Friends' parents said, "You're lucky. You come from a good family." And I believed them. I wore that belief like armor. The idea of researching my family history didn't come from suspicion. It came from pride. I wanted to know where I came from. I wanted names, places, dates, something solid to hold on to. A family tree, roots. I imagined stories of resilience, immigration, hard work, quiet sacrifices. I didn't imagine secrets. I certainly didn't imagine crime. It started in the storage room, the place where things go when you don't want to throw them away, but also don't want to see them. I was cleaning, sorting old boxes, breathing in dust and time. That's when I found the trunk. It was old, heavy. The lock was rusted, broken but not forced. Inside were photo albums, folded documents, and a single brown envelope. The albums were yellowed with age. Most of the photos were harmless: birthdays, group shots, formal gatherings. Then I turned a page and stopped. 6 people stood together in the photograph, well-dressed, serious. What unsettled me wasn't who they were. It was what they weren't doing. None of them were looking at the camera. Their eyes were turned away, downward, sideways, anywhere but forward. On the back, written in faint pencil, were the words, "After this day, everything changed." I felt a sudden tightness in my chest, the kind you can't explain. I took the photo upstairs. "Dad," I asked casually, "who are these people?" He looked at the photo. Then he closed the album, slowly. His expression didn't show anger. It showed finality. "You don't need to look at that again," he said. That night, I couldn't sleep. For the first time in my life, a thought crossed my mind, quiet but heavy. What if my family isn't what I think it is? And somewhere deep inside me, something answered, "You've just opened the door." After that night, something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was subtle, like a hairline crack in glass, invisible unless you knew where to look. But once you noticed it, you couldn't stop seeing it. I went back to my normal routine: work, sleep, small talk. On the surface, nothing was different. But internally, my mind had started doing something it had never done before. It was watching. I watched my father's reactions more closely, the way he paused before answering certain questions, the way his jaw tightened whenever the past came up, even casually. I watched my mother's silence take on new meaning. It no longer felt gentle. It felt strategic. I noticed how she avoided eye contact when old names were mentioned, how she would leave the room the moment certain conversations drifted too close to history. And then there were the memories, the kind you don't remember on purpose. They surfaced slowly, one by one, like pieces floating up from dark water. I remembered being a child and waking up late at night to hushed voices in the living room. Not arguments, something more controlled, more deliberate. I remembered unfamiliar men sitting at our dining table, men who didn't smile, men who never stayed long. I remembered being told not to repeat certain stories outside the house. At the time, it all felt normal. Now, it felt rehearsed. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. Everyone has secrets. Every family has things they don't talk about. But this felt different. This felt organized. One evening, I casually brought up genealogy during dinner. "I'm thinking of building a family tree," I said, "maybe going back a few generations." My father didn't look up from his plate. "Why?" he asked. His tone was neutral, but the room felt colder. "Just curiosity," I replied, "knowing where we come from." My mother's fork stopped midair. "That kind of curiosity isn't always useful," she said softly. No explanation, no follow-up, just a boundary. That was when confusion turned into discomfort. Why would something so harmless feel dangerous? I began searching quietly. Public records, old directories, archived documents. At first, everything seemed normal. Names, addresses, dates. Then I noticed gaps, entire years missing, addresses that changed too frequently, jobs listed that didn't match timelines. It was as if someone had edited history carefully, deliberately. I started keeping notes, not because I was sure of anything, but because my instincts were screaming. Emotionally, I was unraveling. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from doubting the people who raised you. It feels like betrayal, even when no one has confessed to anything. I want it to stop. More than once, I considered closing the laptop and pretending I never started. But curiosity had turned into something darker, something heavier. I needed to know. The discovery came by accident. I was at a public library, one of those old buildings that still smell like paper and dust. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just browsing archived newspapers from decades ago. Then I saw a headline that made my breath catch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sensational. It was understated, almost deliberately so. A small column, buried between unrelated news. The article referenced an investigation. No photos, no names in bold, but one detail stood out. A surname. My surname. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence. Common names exist. But as I read further, my hands began to shake. The article described coordinated activity, multiple individuals, operations spanning years. It didn't describe crimes directly. It hinted, carefully, like someone afraid of what would happen if they said too much. Then I saw the phrase, generational involvement. I read it again, and again. Generational. I felt dizzy. This wasn't just about one person or one mistake. This was about a system, a legacy. I printed the article and folded it into my bag. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I didn't feel shock. I felt dread, because I knew something now. Not the full truth, but enough to understand that I was standing near something dangerous, something that had been buried on purpose, and I had just uncovered the corner of it. That night, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't mention the article. I didn't ask questions. I watched.
I noticed how my father locked the doors, even earlier than usual, how my mother checked the windows before going to bed. I noticed how their silence felt heavier than before, as if they knew, as if they had always known this moment would come. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. One thought repeated in my mind.
After that night in the library, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Not the article, not the unease that had settled in my chest. Something had changed irreversibly. I had glimpsed a past my family had buried, and now it was calling me forward. I started paying attention to everything, every word, every glance, every small hesitation. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was just my overactive mind. I tried to rationalize. I told myself, families have secrets. People lie to protect each other. This is normal. But normal families don't have that kind of tension in their walls. They don't make their own history feel like a trap waiting to snap shut. I started revisiting my childhood memories. I remembered my father's office, small, orderly, almost clinical. There were drawers I had never opened, even as a teenager, drawers that clicked and locked so quietly that no one could hear. I remembered noticing a man once sitting on our porch at night. He didn't belong to our neighborhood. He just appeared, watched, and then disappeared. My father's eyes had followed him long after I was asleep. Then there were the travel logs. Family vacations? Only a handful seemed real. Most trips were unaccounted for, or details were inconsistent. My mother would vaguely say, "You wouldn't understand." I was a child then. I assumed it was just boring adult stuff. Now, in my 20s, those half answers felt like bricks on my chest. I started asking casual questions, disguised as curiosity. "Mom, what did Grandma really do during the war?" "Dad, didn't Uncle John work in logistics?" Reactions varied. Some were subtle, a flash in the eye, a half smile that didn't reach the lips. Others were more deliberate, sudden silence, changing the topic, or subtly steering me away from a room. I noticed small patterns, too. The family dog always barked at certain relatives, but never at me. Letters in the house were shredded before anyone could touch them. Old photos were systematically removed from frames, not hidden, just gone. And the phone calls. I realized sometimes my father received calls in the dead of night, hushed, deliberate conversations. Sometimes my mother would hang up on someone mid-sentence, staring blankly at a wall afterward. And the tone, there was an unspoken weight in every word, like each call carried a threat too dangerous to voice. I began secretly keeping a journal. Every observation, every weird coincidence, every half-truth. I started tracing names I found in the library archives. One name led to another, then another. Before long, I had a long list of people, names, addresses, partial histories, all linked to my family surname. And there it was again, the same pattern, generational involvement, coordinated activity, people moving, disappearing, suddenly wealthy or suddenly poor, like chess pieces in a game I didn't understand. I even tried confronting myself. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe it's paranoia. Maybe my family is just eccentric. But no rational explanation could account for what I was finding, and the deeper I dug, the less rational it became. One night, I decided to check the attic, a place I hadn't been since I was a teenager. Dust coated everything in thick layers, but there was something different here, a smell of old leather, mildew, and iron? I couldn't tell. Boxes stacked haphazardly, each labeled in neat handwriting. I opened one. Photographs, journals, ledgers. The ledgers were financial records. At first, mundane, but then I noticed entries with strange codes, odd numbers, transactions that didn't make sense, people receiving large sums, then vanishing, addresses that matched the ones I had researched. I realized the ledger wasn't just a book of numbers. It was a map, a trail, a record of everything my family had buried. I took a photograph of one page. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I became obsessive. Every weekend, I returned to public archives, libraries, and online databases. Every document was cross-referenced, every gap noted. Sometimes I would stay awake until dawn, reading through microfilm records, phone directories, business filings. Each piece fit together like puzzle fragments, but the full picture was terrifying. And with every new discovery, my father's calm image fractured further in my mind. He was no longer just disciplined or quiet. He was calculating, careful, dangerous in a way I hadn't realized as a child.
The turning point came unexpectedly. I found a folder in the attic labeled simply with my father's initials. It wasn't locked. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. A warning bell rang in my head. A tiny voice whispered, "Don't touch it." But I did. Inside were documents that shattered what I thought I knew about my family. Foreign bank accounts, multiple identities, invoices for things that made no sense, chemical shipments, logistics contracts, surveillance equipment, and a handwritten note in my father's hand. If this ever comes to light, everything ends. I froze. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My palms were sweaty. I had uncovered proof. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't speculation. This was undeniable evidence. And the worst part? The ledger contained my own name and entries I didn't recognize. Dates aligned with events I had been told nothing about. My mind erased. Was I implicated? Was my family protecting me or hiding me? I tried to rationalize. Maybe these were mistakes. Maybe these were old scams, never involving me. But deep down, I knew the truth. This ledger was a red flag, screaming what I didn't want to admit. My family image, the respectable, controlled, perfect image, was a mask. Behind it was something darker, a system of organized actions spanning generations, and I had just found a piece of it. I left the attic in a daze. I needed air. I needed clarity. I needed time to breathe. But outside, the night didn't feel safe. Every shadow seemed thicker. Every passing car felt like surveillance. Every neighbor looked like they might know more than they should. I realized then, the real danger wasn't in discovering the truth. It was in being discovered while I was discovering it. I began noticing small signs I had missed before. Locked drawers I hadn't touched in years, old phones hidden behind bookshelves, odd behaviors from relatives, looks that lingered too long, whispers that ceased when I entered a room. And then came the realization that terrified me more than anything else. I wasn't just investigating history. I was entering a world my family had carefully hidden from me. Every choice I made now carried risk, and the ledger had confirmed it. There was no going back. I had seen a piece of the machine, and once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. The lines between right and wrong, truth and protection, loyalty and betrayal, they blurred instantly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept revisiting the documents, the ledger, the note. The handwriting haunted me. If this ever comes to light, everything ends. I realized the statement wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. From that moment on, I understood. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't just a son. I was now part of a legacy that could destroy me if I wasn't careful. And worse, I didn't know who to trust. Not my father, not my mother, not even the memories I thought were safe. The final moment came as I tried to close the folder. A small envelope fell out. Inside, a photograph, faded, torn at the edges. 6 men, all of them faceless, looking away, one of them standing too close to the edge of the frame. I recognized the jacket, the stance, the hand gesture. It was my father, and the back had one line written in red ink: "We never forget." I froze. The weight of that phrase hit me harder than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't history. It wasn't memory. It was a warning directed at me. I realized for the first time, my father wasn't just hiding a past. He was warning me. And now I had a choice. Dig deeper, knowing I might be in danger, or stop and live my life ignorant of the shadow my own bloodline had cast.
After discovering the ledger and the photograph, I couldn't stay silent. The tension in the house had grown to something almost unbearable. Even when my parents spoke, it felt like they were speaking around me, not to me. Every glance, every pause, every word carried an invisible weight, a message I wasn't sure I was ready to read. I started testing the waters. I would casually bring up old events. Dad, what about that time Uncle John disappeared for months? Mom, who was that man visiting Grandma last year? Most times they would stiffen. Their eyes would shift, their posture changing minutely, subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to me now. It was as if my curiosity had broken an invisible rule. The house felt smaller, colder. The walls seemed to lean in. I could almost feel the ledger's presence like a ghost hovering over every conversation. I tried to confront them indirectly, using looks instead of words. Sometimes I would catch my father staring at me, his gaze unwavering, penetrating. He didn't speak, he didn't move, but I could feel the message. I see you. I know you know. And my mother, though quieter, had a different weapon. Silence. The way she would look at me when I asked a seemingly innocent question. Her face calm, but her eyes sharp, cutting deeper than any words. I realized quickly, confrontation didn't need dialogue. It could live in a look, a pause, a shift in tone. Power dynamics in the house changed instantly. I was no longer just a son. I was a potential threat. And suddenly, every choice I made, every question I asked, every observation I wrote in my journal felt like walking a tightrope over a pit I couldn't see the bottom of. Even the family dinner felt charged. I watched them talk, laugh, pass dishes, everything normal on the surface. But I saw the underlying currents, the unspoken warnings, the tension that could snap at any moment, the tiny hesitations, all pointing to one reality. I had crossed into dangerous territory. I became hyper-aware of every detail. I started noting patterns in their behavior. How my father answered the phone, how he avoided certain rooms, how my mother would check the locks more carefully when certain relatives arrived. I realized they were testing me, seeing how far I could go before I understood my place, or perhaps before they understood how much I already knew. My emotional state was fragile. Part of me wanted to flee, to escape the suffocating tension, but another part, the part that had stumbled into the attic, found the ledger, and seen the photograph, demanded the truth. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. And every time I tried to engage them casually, my fear grew. The fear wasn't just of the unknown, it was of the people I had always trusted, and the realization that the family I loved, the foundation I thought was unshakable, might not exist in the way I believed. I began taking subtle measures. Phone calls I couldn't intercept were recorded mentally. Every conversation was cataloged in my head. Their reactions to seemingly innocent questions were stored, patterns recognized. And every day I became more aware they were aware I was aware. It was a dangerous equilibrium. One evening, while clearing out old papers in the living room, I accidentally knocked a small envelope off the shelf. It landed open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten. I froze. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting, unmistakable. My father's. And the words were enough to make my stomach turn. Not yet. Wait until the time is right. Do not let him see. The breakthrough, or breakdown, happened the following morning. I was making coffee in the kitchen when my father walked in. No greeting, no casual chatter, just silence. I put the mug down. My hands were shaking slightly. I couldn't help but say something. "Dad, there's more to our family, isn't there?" He froze mid-step. A slow, deliberate pause. His gaze met mine, cold, calculating. Then he sighed, almost a whisper. "You're learning fast." That one line carried a weight that almost crushed me. It wasn't denial. It wasn't evasion. It was acknowledgement. Later, when I confronted my mother, hoping for clarity, she hesitated. She leaned against the counter, hands gripping tightly. Her eyes flickered. Guilt, fear, maybe relief. "I tried to protect you," she said softly, "but some things you weren't meant to know yet." Her voice trembled slightly. For the first time, she looked like she might break. Her composure, the shield I had always trusted, was cracking. It was the first real confirmation I had. The family's darkness was real. Not just a story, not just old mistakes. A living, breathing reality. The more I observed, the more patterns became clear. Private calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Family trips that were never explained. Money transfers that didn't match any known occupation. It all began to connect in my mind. And then came the most terrifying piece. The ledger, the photo, and now my father's quiet acknowledgement. I understood. This wasn't history. This wasn't a secret to be protected lightly. This was ongoing. I started noticing small slips, almost accidental revelations. One night, overhearing a conversation between my father and a relative. He shouldn't know yet, not until it's finalized. I didn't need more context. I knew he referred to me. I realized for the first time that the adults I had trusted my entire life weren't simply hiding history. They were actively hiding something dangerous, and they knew I was close to uncovering it. That realization brought fear and anger. I felt trapped in my own home, under the watch of people who could, if they chose, destroy me. Every step I took in my research now felt like a high-stakes game. Every question I asked could push me closer to danger. And I began to sense the truth. The longer I waited, the more control they maintained. I had to act subtly. One evening, I left a folder on the kitchen table, intentionally as a test. My father noticed immediately. He didn't confront me. He didn't say a word. But later, when I returned to the table, the folder had been moved, and a new sheet of paper had been placed on top. Handwriting unmistakable. A single line. "You're too close. Stop now, or it will consume you." The message wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And I understood something crucial. The monsters I had feared weren't imaginary. They were real. And they were closer than I had ever imagined. Living in the same house, watching, waiting. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bed, the one that had once felt safe. Now it felt like a cage. I realized something chilling. The truth had started leaking. And if I pushed further, if I continued asking, digging, probing, I might uncover more than I was ready to survive. The following weeks were unbearable. Every corner of the house felt heavy, thick with tension, like the air itself had absorbed the weight of my discoveries. I could no longer act as if nothing had changed, because nothing had remained the same. I noticed my father's behavior shift. He didn't speak as much anymore. He observed me silently, like a predator circling prey. I couldn't tell if he was testing me, punishing me, or trying to gauge just how much I knew. My mother became withdrawn. Even her silence was different, not comforting, but suffocating. She would start conversations and abandon them mid-sentence, her eyes darting to the door or window. Her voice trembled when she spoke of nothing important. Every smile seemed forced, every laugh brittle. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a cage, each wall holding back truths I wasn't meant to see, and each secret closing in around me. I tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. I went to work, I met friends, I acted as though the world outside was ordinary. But inside, I was unraveling. Every interaction with my parents became a minefield. Every casual comment I made, every glance I offered seemed to be scrutinized, measured. I had no allies, no one to trust. And the ledger, the photograph, and the notes haunted me constantly. I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. I had loved these people blindly. I had trusted them implicitly. And that trust was gone. Gone the moment I discovered the ledger. Gone the moment I saw my father in that photograph. Gone the moment I read the words we never forget. I realized with painful clarity that my entire childhood, every memory I had of stability, was built on lies. And betrayal isn't something you prepare for. It hits raw and personal. The breakdown didn't happen in a single moment. It was gradual, like the slow cracking of ice beneath weight. One night, my father's voice carried from the office. "You shouldn't be looking for things you don't understand." A calm voice, deliberate, not yelling, not threatening, yet every word carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I realized then that confrontation wasn't an option, not yet. I tried talking to my mother, hoping to find solace or guidance. "You've been digging too deep," she said softly. Her hand shook slightly as she folded laundry. "Some things are better left buried." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her. I wanted answers. But instead, I walked away because I realized in this family, questions were dangerous. I started noticing the small betrayals that had been happening for years, ones I had missed as a child. Friends or relatives visiting only to disappear afterward, letters shredded before I could see them, accounts and addresses that vanished without explanation. And then, one night, I discovered something I couldn't ignore. An envelope tucked behind my mother's bedside drawer. Inside, bank statements, invoices, and correspondence all linked to operations I couldn't fully comprehend. The names included people I had researched in archives, the same generational network mentioned in the newspaper article. My hand shook. This was proof, and yet it was worse than I expected. Some entries listed dates when I had been present at events I thought were ordinary family gatherings. I realized with horror I wasn't just discovering the past, I had been unknowingly part of it. By now, I was emotionally shattered. I couldn't trust my parents. I couldn't trust my memories. I couldn't even trust myself. The ledger, the photograph, the letters, everything pointed to a single, unavoidable truth. My family wasn't just hiding mistakes. They were hiding crimes, and I was too close to see it fully. I had reached a point where silence was no longer safe, and yet speaking out could destroy everything: my relationship with my parents, my sense of identity, possibly even my safety. I thought about what it meant to confront them, to demand truth, to expose everything. The ledger, now fully in my possession, revealed names, dates, and accounts, financial transactions that didn't match any legal occupation, movements and disappearances aligned with documents in public archives. And then I realized the final terrifying implication. I could no longer pretend ignorance.
Every moment of hesitation carried risk. Every choice to speak or remain silent would shape the outcome. I understood then that I had reached the point of no return. There was no turning back. I had two options: pretend I didn't know, live in ignorance, and possibly be complicit in the shadows I had uncovered; pursue the truth fully, knowing it could destroy my family, or worse, put me in real danger. The choice was mine, and I could already feel the consequences of either path pressing down like a weight on my chest. That night, I watched my parents from the shadows of the living room. They didn't speak, they didn't acknowledge me, but I could feel their awareness, their knowledge, their watchfulness. The ledger sat on my desk. The photograph leaned against the wall. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what I had seen. I couldn't unlearn the legacy of deception, betrayal, and darkness that had been passed down through generations. The truth was no longer hidden. It was alive. It was mine, and I was trapped in it. Cliffhanger. As I sat in my room trying to process everything, I felt it, a presence behind me, a subtle shift in the house. I wasn't alone. A shadow moved. A voice whispered my name softly, almost a warning, almost a threat. I realized with sinking horror, the monsters in my family were not confined to history. They were here, and now they knew I knew.
The moment finally came without drama. No shouting, no sudden violence, no cinematic explosion of secrets, just a quiet, devastating collapse. It happened on an ordinary morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, pretending to read something I didn't care about. My father stood near the window, hands behind his back, watching the street like he always did. My mother moved slowly between the stove and the counter, her movements careful, deliberate. We were 3 people sharing a room, but none of us were together. I didn't plan to say anything that day, but there's a point where silence becomes heavier than truth. "I know everything," I said. The words didn't shake. My voice didn't break. That surprised even me. My father didn't turn around. My mother froze. Seconds passed. Then my father spoke. "Not everything," he said quietly. That was it. No denial, no anger, no surprise, just correction. I felt something inside me finally snap, not violently, but cleanly, like a cord being cut. I stood up. "I know enough," I said, "enough to understand this wasn't just mistakes. This wasn't survival. This was organized, intentional, and it shows up everywhere. The records, the money, the names. It goes back generations." Still, he didn't face me. "You were never supposed to see that," my mother whispered. Her voice cracked. That was the moment the last illusion died. They hadn't lied to protect me. They had lied to control what I became. My father finally turned around. Up close, he didn't look powerful. He looked tired. "You think you discovered something new," he said, "but this family has lived with this reality longer than you've been alive." "So it's true," I said. He met my eyes. Yes. One word. No justification, no apology, just confirmation. My chest tightened. "All of it?" I asked. "The ledger, the operations, the people who disappeared?" My mother sat down heavily. "We didn't kill anyone, not directly." The word directly echoed in my head like a gunshot. My father spoke again. "Things happen when systems are in place," he said. "People make choices. Consequences follow." I stared at him. "You're talking about lives like they're transactions." "That's because that's how you survive. Emotion is a luxury." I realized then that I had never truly known him. The man who taught me discipline, responsibility, restraint, those weren't virtues. They were tools. The rest came out slowly, not as a confession, as an explanation. Their family, my family, had been part of a long-running criminal network, not loud crime, not reckless violence, infrastructure crime, logistics, money movement, influence, silence. Generations had participated, some willingly, some out of fear, some because there was no way out. "We didn't choose this," my mother said through tears. "It chose us." But that wasn't true. Someone always chooses first, and someone always chooses to continue. By the end of that conversation, I felt hollow, not angry, not even shocked, just empty. The truth had finally surfaced, and it wasn't dramatic. It was bureaucratic, cold, efficient, and devastating. I left the house that night, not running, not sneaking, just walking out. My father didn't stop me. My mother cried quietly. No one chased me. That hurt more than if they had. The exposure didn't happen immediately. It took weeks. I wrestled with the decision every day. Go to authorities, leak information, walk away and pretend I never knew. Each option came with consequences, but one truth was unavoidable. If I stayed silent, I became part of it. I handed over what I had: documents, records, names. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because silence was killing me. The fallout was brutal. Investigations started quietly, then loudly. Bank accounts were frozen, homes were searched, names surfaced. Not all at once, but enough. My family's name, once associated with respect, became associated with suspicion. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Old friends stopped calling. The house I grew up in became a symbol of something ugly. My parents were questioned. Not arrested, not yet, but exposed. And exposure is its own kind of punishment. I wasn't celebrated. There was no applause, no heroic moment, just distance from everyone. Some people called me brave. Others called me a traitor. Most didn't know what to say. And honestly, neither did I. I struggled afterward, with guilt, with grief, with the loss of an identity I didn't realize I had until it was gone. You don't just lose your family, you lose your past. Your childhood memories become unreliable narrators. Your sense of self fractures. There were nights I questioned everything. Did I do the right thing? Was silence really worse? Could I have just walked away? But then I remembered the ledger, the names, the warning written in red ink, and I knew. Some legacies only end when someone is willing to burn them down. I don't speak to my father anymore. My mother sends short messages sometimes. "I hope you're safe. I still love you." Love doesn't undo harm. Today I live quietly. No secrets, no shadows, but also no comfort. The truth didn't set me free. It cost me everything. And yet, I would do it again. Because living a lie, especially when built on suffering, is its own kind of prison. I learned something important through all of this. You don't inherit guilt, but you do inherit responsibility for what you do once you know. And knowing changes everything. Some family trees don't produce fruit, they produce poison. And sometimes the only way to survive is to cut yourself away from the roots, even if it means standing alone. This wasn't a story about crime, it was a story about choice. And the moment I chose truth, my old life ended. Not with closure, but with clarity. And that has to be enough.